Welcome, everyone. So excited to have everyone here. Good evening. My name is Jessica Maravilla. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the ACLU of Oregon's new policy director. Although we're almost at the end of January, I'd like to wish you a happy new year. And thank you so much for joining us tonight and for your commitment to a more just Oregon. So next week, the 2022 legislative session will kick off, and tonight we're excited to share the ACLU of Oregon's priorities for this session. Tonight, you'll hear from a few of our partners from Next Up Action Fund, Family Forward, Pecun, and REAP Inc. And we'll talk about how we're working in collaboration and how you can stay engaged throughout the session. This event is recorded and will be available on our website tomorrow, so please feel free to share it with friends and family. We will also be sharing a lot of information through slides, documents, and links in the chat box, so don't worry. I will follow you up tomorrow with all the resources so that you can just sit back and listen tonight. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our captioner, Jamie Pellegrino from LNS Captioning, and our ASL interpreter, Sarah Comerford. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you prefer to have the interpreter's window large and the rest of the participants or slide window smaller, you can use a toggle feature on the Zoom to adjust the screens to your liking. We will have a short Q&A session towards the end, so please send in your questions by using the Q&A box and not the chat box. Feel free to throw, of course, some love and supportive comments into the chat throughout the webinar. And if anyone wants ASL interpretation to ask a question, please let us know by sending a message in the chat box. So before we dive in, I'd like to introduce my amazing colleague, Mariana Garcia Medina, and ask her to ground us today with some community agreements.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Mariana Garcia Medina, she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm the Senior Policy Associate with the ACLU of Oregon team. Our group agreements apply to all elements, including the chat, Q&A, and live conversation. By participating today, it is our expectation that you will create a space which values and respects differences of race, ethnicity, immigration status, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ability, and socioeconomic circumstance. We each will respect and contribute to the ACLU's culture of belonging by fostering an equitable and inclusive experience in all aspects of community work by centering BIPOC voices and experiences. This will look like listening to understand, making space for and prioritizing oppressed voices, speaking my truth responsibly, taking responsibility for your impact regardless of your intent, and for white people and other privileged identities to not put the burden on BIPOC communities and other oppressed groups to educate you about the harm that your actions and behavior have created. Being willing to do things differently and experiencing discomfort. Seeing discomfort and tension as an opportunity to grow, not a barrier to it. Thank you for your willingness to be here with us today and honoring the space. All right, we are seeing the poll results. We have lots of folks from Portland metro area. We have some folks representing from Central Oregon. All right, we got Mount Hood and Columbia River Gorge in the house, Willamette Valley. We also have someone from Southern Oregon. Yay, I'm glad to see that we're seeing folks from all over the state joining us tonight. So thank you all for being here. All right, we're gonna dive in. Tonight, we will share our policy agenda from the ACLU, and we've also have invited some amazing community advocates to talk to us through the bills. We'll also give you some actions to take and also give you an opportunity to ask questions. With that, I will pass it on to Jessica.
Thank you, Mariana, for grounding us. And also thank you everyone for making. So happy to see folks from across the state. That's exciting. So yes, policy priorities. Here at the ACLU of Oregon, we are striving to center our work on the individuals and communities in Oregon who are the most marginalized and impacted by the systemic inequities of racism, xenophobia, misogyny, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, socioeconomic injustice, and other types of oppressions. So these communities include Black, Indigenous, and people of color, immigrants and refugees, people with varying abilities and disabilities, LGBTQ+ communities, and people experiencing poverty and other social economic justices. So we seek to create a real and not performative public and community safety, wellness, and care throughout democratic values and processes that recognize value and dignity are rooted in our fundamental civil liberties and civil rights. So our policy team is excited to take on a variety of efforts this legislative session, many efforts deriving from unfinished business in the 2021 legislative session. For example, you'll be seeing Senate Bill 1510, Transforming Justice, which stems from the last year's House Bill 2002. And this creates a greater justice for all Oregonians by lessening the ticket level police interactions that have resulted in disproportionate rates of police violation towards Black and other people of color. It will also improve success for people on probation and parole by removing barriers to succeed after incarceration, and it will invest resources in community and centered efforts to address racial and disparities in the criminal legal system. You'll be seeing, as again, unfinished business like Senate Bill 1543, universal legal representation, because all Oregonians should be treated with dignity and respect regardless of where they were born. And Senate Bill 1543 safeguards that due process by providing immigrant Oregonians with access to their rights under the law. And of course, we will also be tracking bills with the potential to yield concerning impacts, such as House Bill 4131, which seeks to make changes to allow more flexibility to police informants to use tools of enforcement such as tear gas. So we will be keeping you updated on everything, and we appreciate your engagement and support throughout the session. We really couldn't do this without you. So I'd like now to invite our fearless leader, Sandy Chung, to share a little bit more on one of our priority bills this session. So Sandy, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you tonight. I'm Sandy Chung. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Oregon. Tonight, I want to talk to you about a really important bill that we've been working on for the past year. In the American criminal legal system, every juror's voice is supposed to matter. And so in almost all states and in federal courts, every juror has to vote for a guilty verdict in order for a person to be found guilty of a crime. However, in Oregon and Louisiana, we deviated from this principle of justice. In fact, Oregon and Louisiana were the only two states in US history that allowed a person to be criminally convicted and sent to prison by a non-unanimous jury conviction, where up to 2 jurors could be ignored in silence when they did not support a guilty verdict. Historical research shows that Louisiana adopted its non-unanimous jury law in 1898 to establish the supremacy of the white race. Oregon followed Louisiana's racist actions by adopting our law in 1934, during a time when there was a rising tide of racism, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia pushed by the Ku Klux Klan, during a time when tens of thousands of Oregonians were KKK members. 2 years ago, in 2020, the US Supreme Court said enough. They struck down Oregon's law, finding it unconstitutional, and said that its starting purpose was tied to white supremacy and xenophobia. In fact, the Supreme Court specifically stated this, that our law could be traced to the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and efforts to dilute the influence of racial, ethnic, and religious minorities on Oregon juries. After the Supreme Court decision, it would have been just and fair to give all people convicted by a racist, unconstitutional, non-unanimous jury the remedy of a fair process. But this did not happen. People with more recent convictions were given this opportunity for a fair process, but people with older convictions were given no options. They had to stay in prison or be shackled with a criminal conviction on their records. And there was no good reason for this. The Supreme Court simply decided to impose an arbitrary date for fairness and justice based on the age of a person's legal case. It's not fair or just for any Oregonian convicted by a non-unanimous jury conviction to remain in prison or have a criminal record simply because of the age of their legal case. This is not consistent with Oregon's values to allow the harmful impact of a racist law to continue harming people for no good reason, even after this law has been struck down by the courts. So this year, in February, the Oregon legislature has a historic opportunity to address the systemic racism and injustice of non-unanimous jury convictions. They can basically make sure that anyone who was convicted by a non-unanimous jury has the opportunity for a fair process. And we really believe at the ACLU of Oregon that taking steps to address racism in our criminal legal system is very important, especially because Black Oregonians are imprisoned at a rate almost 4 times that of white people, and other people of color are imprisoned at much higher rates than white people as well. Racial justice is an important value for Oregonians, and in order for our state to change systemic racism, including the systemic racism in our criminal legal system, our state must acknowledge racist laws and take actual actions to change the harms of those laws. I know that you're proud to live in a state where our state's elected leaders are fighting to reverse and address the harms of racism. So I encourage you to contact your lawmakers and encourage them to pass Senate Bill 1511. More information about how to contact our lawmakers is available in our action alert, which is at the tiny URL that you'll be provided with, and that was also in the prior slide. Thank you everyone so much for your support with this bill and all of the other important legislation that we will be discussing with you tonight.
Thank you, Sandy, for highlighting the history behind non-unanimous juries, but also why it's important to give Oregonians who were convicted with a non-unanimous jury the opportunity for a just criminal process. I'm now excited to introduce our next 2 speakers. We have 2 fearless leaders, Isabela Villarreal, who's Policy and Communications Manager, and Ilona J. Wilson, who is the Executive Director of Next Up Action Fund. Today, they're going to be talking to us about the Restoration of Voting Rights Bill. Thank you, Isabela and Ilona.
Thank you, everyone. We're so excited to be here tonight and talk to you about House Bill 4147, Restoration of Voting Rights. So a little bit of background into how we got started into this work is that we got involved with the issue in 2018 after being invited to present on our work to a group of young incarcerated men at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility. And over the course of a year, we returned to the facility and strategized about paths for young incarcerated people to take part in the legislative process. And we heard a lot of different ideas from them. And one of them was them expressing that they didn't currently have the right to vote and how meaningful that would be. So because of that, and because of how meaningful they said that would be, we decided to introduce the Restoration of Voting Rights Act in 2021. And while that didn't pass, we are excited to reintroduce the bill for this short legislative session, which is now House Bill 4147. Currently, we are working with over 30 respected justice and community and culturally specific organizations and groups, both locally and nationally, to help pass this bill and make it a reality. And so a little bit about why this is important. This session really is a historic opportunity for Oregon to end over a century of disenfranchisement of people that are currently incarcerated on a felony conviction. This bill is really simple too. It would allow people to register to vote, update their voter registration, and vote in elections. It would affect around 13,000 people, and everyone would be voting at their last mailing address, so no voting blocks would be formed. People would also not be able to run for office. Oregon is very well positioned for this, as we have paid postage, universal vote by mail, and a really accessible voter registration system. Maine and Vermont never disenfranchise people that are currently incarcerated, and DC has restored the right to vote to people that are currently incarcerated. Currently, many states are looking at making this change, and Chicago just this last year attempted to pass this legislation, which only didn't pass by 3 votes. And with that, I will pass it to Ilona.
Thank you, Isabella, and folks at ACLU for hosting this. In addition to that piece, that although the practice of denying voting rights to people in prison is widespread in the United States, it has little basis beyond a historical desire to silence the voices of the incarcerated. As a leader among the states on protecting and expanding voter rights, Oregon should welcome its incarcerated citizens back into the fold as voters. The law was created in the Jim Crow era, and Oregon must be working to eliminate laws such as this that are rooted in white supremacy and do not promote community well-being. Due to disproportionate rates of incarceration, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and young people are disenfranchised at much higher rates. In an election year, it is especially important that we examine who is able and allowed to engage in our electoral process. Excluding an entire population of people undermines our democracy. To strengthen democracy and address significant racial disparities, we must pass reforms establishing universal voting for people impacted by the criminal legal system. We know that 95% of people in prison return to their communities. Reentry can be a difficult process, but having strong ties to the community increases the chances of success. Civic engagement, specifically voting, increases the ability to reintegrate, reducing recidivism and making communities safer. Oregon is a leader in expanding and protecting the right to vote, and I believe that our democracy is stronger when more people can participate. We can continue to lead in creating a just democracy through the passage of the Restoration of Voting Rights Act, which is again House Bill 4147.
Thank you so much, Isabella and Alona. We look forward to the continued collaboration to restoring the right to vote for incarcerated Oregonians. And House Bill 4147 really advances our democratic values and recognizes that incarcerated Oregonians are fellow citizens with inherent value and dignity. And we are committed to getting it past this legislative session. So thank you for joining us today. I'd now like to introduce and welcome to the space Anderson DuBois from REAP Inc., who has been a leader in lifting up the voice and getting a seat at the table at the legislature with our youth, which is very, very important. So Anderson, the space is yours.
Thank you. I'm Anderson DuBois, the Strategic Initiatives Manager for REAP. And student alumni of the organization as well. We believe that we're working to create the next wave of leaders, and everything that we do is to elevate youth voice. And that's why I'm here today to represent HB 4099. And so with that, some of our goals with this is to create a state level youth majority led racial equity and justice youth collaborative at the Oregon Department of Education, as well to support diverse youth leaders across Oregon in policymaking process at the state level. And a big part of that is not just racial and ethnicity, like diversity, but also like regionally is a big part of what we're looking to get in terms of youth represented within this collaborative. We're also looking to work to ensure that youth, particularly youth, who've been historically and are currently underserved, are meaningfully involved in the creation and implementation of policies and practices that impact their lives. And so with that, we realize that there's no designated youth majority-led advisory body within the state. And to my knowledge, there aren't anything like this within the nation as well. And so that's important on why we're trying to do this and create this, because there's so many pieces of policy, just as we've been talking today about some of these other bills that directly impact youth, that should be supported, that our youth should have input on, that don't always get input with, like lowering the voting age to 16 so that more of our youth can have a say in what's happening in their lives. As well, youth leaders sharing their lived experiences. We realize that when we support and engage youth leaders, we're also able to improve academic achievement, social, emotional development, and policies and practices that are youth-centered, meeting our youth needs. This is very, very important. And so the original creation of this and how this got started, REAP students were interfacing and meeting at a COSA event that was Zoom bombed. Students were sharing their experiences on their educational experiences of what it's like And some of the students were students of color, sharing that they hear day in and day out racial slurs and not seeing things immediately done, or not seeing their culture represented within the curriculum or within the classroom on the walls and things like that. And so this Zoom bombing really disrupted their voices. And so as a result, working with COSA and a lot of other organizations, OASSA, OASC, and ODE, looking to make sure that our students' voices are elevated within the state. So that's how this got started. And so yeah, it would be composed of at least 2 youth ages 11 to 21 from each ESD or Education Service District, each ESD region, for geographic representation and diversity, with majority of youth coming from racial and ethnic communities who have been historically and are currently underserved. And that includes youth identifying as LGBTQ SIA+, emerging bilingual, disabled, and or navigating poverty. And so with that, we're looking, should this go through, this would get started July 1st, where the bill would become effective. October 31st, 2022, the Department of Education would convene the work group to become a member of the Racial Equity and Justice Youth Collaborative. And then February 15th, the inaugural Racial Equity and Justice Youth Collaborative will be appointed. And so we would meet at least 6 times a year with the youth to provide input. And then as well, August 13 is where that work group would sunset. And then within every 2 years within that, we would be able to report out some of the findings to the governor and be looking at topics around equity within the state and equity policy, looking at how leadership systems are run around with our youth, as well as overall policy that would affect our youth student experiences. And so we're really grateful to have all the different sponsors a part of the bill and connecting with ACLU and different groups like that to be here to share this information with you. And a part of our call to action is really to take out some time and look up some more information directly on the bill. The information's up on the OLIS website, where you can look up HB 4099. I understand that the OLIS website is still getting the link together to provide written testimony. We're always looking for folks to write letters of support to submit. The hearing is going to be February 3rd. So if you get in written testimony before February 3rd, that is where the committee members will be able to review that. And with that, I thank you for the time and look forward to answering any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you for your leadership and all youth activists and coalition partners that are working hard to pass this bill and elevate the voices of students that would be able to contribute to policies that directly affect them. So thank you very much. I am now excited to introduce our next speaker, who is also a fearless leader here in Oregon, Lisa Kwan. Lisa Kwan is a policy manager for Family Forward, and today she will be talking to us about the Gender Responsiveness Bill. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mariana. It's so good to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Kwan, and my pronouns are she and hers, and I'm the policy manager at Family Forward Oregon. We organize mothers and caregivers across the state to fight for economic, gender, and reproductive justice. In this session, we are supporting House Bill 4146, which addresses incarcerated women at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, which is Oregon's only women's prison. And we became involved with this bill back in 2020 when we participated in a work group facilitated by Rep. Tana Sanchez to hear from formerly incarcerated women who had really traumatic experiences while they were serving their sentences there. And from that work group, we knew that there needed to be more legislation to improve the conditions and how women are treated at Coffee Creek. And so to give some background, women are the fastest growing population in both state and federal prisons, and they have unique experiences and risk factors when they enter the prison system, such as domestic and sexual violence, trauma, mental health and substance abuse challenges, among many others. And at Coffee Creek, 80% of incarcerated women are mothers and are the primary caretakers of their children. So knowing that we have a prison system that is designed for men by men, women need specific services that are trauma-informed, gender-responsive, and culturally responsive. And without this, prisons will continue cycles of trauma and harm among incarcerated women, and not just them, but their families and their children. Next slide, please. So what does the bill actually do? House Bill 4146 requires a third-party organization that is independent from the Department of Corrections, which was very important when the incarcerated women were telling us their experiences. It requires an independent organization to conduct a gender-responsive assessment that is nationally recognized at Coffee Creek to improve the conditions for incarcerated women. The bill also requires a gender-responsive coordinator to form an advisory council of women and individuals impacted by the prison system, and holding listening sessions across the state to seek input on policy recommendations that will better benefit women and families at Coffee Creek. And from the assessment and listening session, the gender responsive coordinator will then present to the legislature to inform new policies at Coffee Creek to strengthen gender responsive programming, services to better support families who are in prison. And this is really significant, especially because, like I said, Coffee Creek is the only women's prison in Oregon. And so women have unique experiences. We've heard from them that the guards have been verbally abusive, and when there are strip searches, if you're a victim of domestic violence, then you're going to be traumatized and triggered from that. And so we really want to be intentional about how women are receiving services and how they're being treated there. And so this bill will also decrease incarceration, and that's the goal, right, to prevent women from being incarcerated. And so we're working on this bill with Rep. Reynolds, and to take action on this bill, please support ACLU's policy agenda. And we also have a hearing next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a beautiful explanation of House Bill 4146. And yes, things are moving fast. So excited to hear that there's already a hearing for it next week. And this initiative is definitely necessary to create opportunities for healing and rehabilitative solutions throughout an assessment of Coffee Creek, Oregon's prison for women. So thanks for joining us tonight. And so last but not least, tonight we are joined by an empowering woman who enjoys to put off fires in her off time, literally. So with us tonight, we have Marta Sonato from Pecun with a very important message on a bill this legislative session. So Marta, if you'd like to join us to give us a little debrief on Farmworker Overtime, we will be showing a video for you tonight before we invite Marta into the space.
I just want to say that the work that we do I just want to say that the work that we do is very low paying. We struggle to survive day to day. We need protections, we need higher wages, and we need to be not considered second-class citizens. This is why I urge our leaders to work to create protections for us, the same way we have been showing up for our communities, for our country, to put food on the table, even though they might see us as less than. And that's why I ask that, they give out protections for us.
Thank you so much for sharing that video with us, Marta. We'd like to give you another space to give us a little bit more into detail of some of the issues that our farm workers are going through.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you everybody for taking time this evening to learn about these very important issues and policies that will be coming through the short legislative session. It's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Marta Sonato, and I'm the political director at Pecun, Oregon's Farm Worker Union. So for Farm Worker, So today I want to take some time to talk about a very important policy that we are working on this year, which is around farm worker overtime pay. This is actually a policy that came up in our annual membership convention in 2019, where our farm worker members asked why they weren't covered by overtime pay, despite doing one of the most dangerous and hard and backbreaking works, which is working in our agricultural industry. And some of those folks also, migrate to our neighboring states like California that does have overtime pay for farm workers. And so I think the biggest thing that came up was around why aren't we covered by overtime pay? And we deserve it too. And so that year we got a directive from our members to bring this forth and to change our laws to ensure that they are also covered by overtime pay. We brought this issue in the long legislative session last year, and we made significant headway. I think there were quite a bit of momentum that we built, and farm worker voices were centered and grounded and were heard loud and clear. We want farm worker overtime pay now. Unfortunately, the policy did not move through the Ways and Means process, and we've been working in the interim with some of our chief sponsors to ensure that we bring this back this session. And so we've been working with Rep. Holvey and Rep. Salinas because Oregon must and should get this done this year. So talk a little bit about farm worker overtime and why this exclusion came to be. It's actually a very overtime exclusions of farm workers have a history of racism and exclusion. In 1938, when legislators were considering the Fair Labor Standards Act, the provision around around overtime pay, they decided to make an intentional choice to exclude farm workers and domestic workers from receiving this benefit. And there are many archives and documentation that show that the only reason that farm workers were excluded were solely on racist reasons. Oftentimes I hear about seasonality and how the industry is different. Those were not the arguments that legislators were having back in 1938. And the reason is that domestic workers and farm workers, most of them were Black, Black farm workers in southern United States. And this was really a legacy, a shameful legacy to intentionally exclude folks from receiving this pay. We know that excluding farm workers was wrong in 1938, and it continues to be wrong now. And our state, we have a responsibility to end this exclusion in our labor laws. I often say we were not there, right, in 1938 in those rooms, but we do have a responsibility to make a choice and end that. And farm workers deserve equal treatment and the same quality of life as any other worker. They are doing important, hard, and dangerous work in one of the largest sectors of our state economy. And they are essential in feeding our families across Oregon. They have equal pay to anyone else and the opportunity for a safe and healthy work schedule. So these are the options that we'll be seeing in this legislative session. As you saw, House Bill 4002 is a proposal from Rep. Holvey on farm worker overtime. And I do want to go, a little bit into what some of our options are to change our overtime laws, either through the state legislature and or through BOLI rulemaking as well. As I mentioned, we want to get this done in the legislature. We want to ensure that farm worker rights are protected in statute. And so Rep. Holvey has put forth this proposal, House Bill 4002, that essentially proposes a 5-year transition period on overtime pay for farm workers. This would be, our neighboring states, Washington and California, do have overtime laws for farm workers on the books, and they both look different. They do have transition periods or transition years to, transition growers into being able to pay overtime wages. And so this policy eventually does get to a 40-hour threshold by 2027. So by 2027, farm workers would be receiving overtime pay after 40 hours a work week. And you know, it's been difficult too for our members to know that they'll probably continue waiting a little bit more before receiving the same benefit as many workers that are right now covered through our overtime law. And what this policy also incorporates is a tax credit for growers. So to support them with up to 50% of the costs, so, you know, the overtime wage costs. And so, you know, we hope that that can offset some of those impacts, especially as we've heard on small family farms. Once again, that is our preferred method. Our preferred pathway is a legislative solution. This is a very controversial issue in the legislature, and there is significant opposition from growers in the agricultural industry. So there is another pathway as well if we don't see farm worker overtime make it through the session. And that is starting a rulemaking process through the Bureau of Labor and Industries, where it would create a rule to extend overtime pay to farm workers. Once again, I think potentially also transitioning before getting to full to overtime pay after 40 hours a work week. And so, you know, we can't afford not to pay farm workers in Oregon overtime. As I mentioned, our neighboring states, Washington and California, already have farm worker overtime laws in the books. And if we don't pay our skilled farm workers what they deserve, they will take their abilities to where they are better compensated, leaving Oregon farms behind. And, you know, to be competitive, Oregon farm worker employers must pay overtime. And we think that, you know, financial support such as this tax credit will be very helpful to make sure that that transition is as smooth and easy as possible. Farm worker overtime, you know, is not only about equal pay, it's also about justice and equality. It's about safety and health, and it's about quality of life for our folks. A recent report from OHSU shows that long hours increase the rates of injury and mental health stress and impact the workers' families and qualities of life. Farm workers cannot afford to keep mandatory but uncompensated overtime that increases the chances of developing serious pain and injuries. The least we can do for these essential frontline workers is provide the overtime protections they deserve and that other states are already providing. Farm workers have worked to feed our families through a pandemic, catastrophic fires, hazardous air quality levels, and dangerous heat waves. So join me in contacting your lawmaker. Please let them know that farm workers need and deserve farm worker overtime pay now. And so we do have a link I think it was in my slide, we do have a link to contact your lawmaker. It's really important that they hear from people all over the state that this is a priority. This needs to get done and should get done this year. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time, Marta. You are enlightening us with lifting up a bill that needs a lot of attention, and the time is now. Our farm workers can't wait any longer, and in talking to the community, even in the transition, 5-year transition bill with Representative Holby, they're a little bit outraged at why they have to wait 5 years to be treated with equity and equally as others. So yeah, we will be sending all of these details and all of these links to folks so that you can email your legislators and send messaging. So please don't worry about it. We will be sending it tomorrow, so you'll have all the details there. And we do have several questions in the Q&A. If we can't get to all of your questions tonight, we will be trying to answer them individually, making sure that we get all of your questions answered. But I'll get us started. So we have a question from Tasha. So for Martha, or anyone else, are there other immigrants' rights bills that we should be keeping an eye out?
Yeah, definitely. I can take a little bit on that. I think one of our other priorities that we're supporting is universal representation for our community. So it's Senate Bill 1543. Make sure to jot it down. And this one is in particular to making sure that we're providing, like I said, universal legal representation. We already know that our country's immigration court system is so complex and confusing, and oftentimes, many immigrants are left to navigate this complicated system by themselves when they're given a deportation order, and often in a language that they're not fluent in. So through universal representation, Oregon would connect immigrants with legal support and help families stay together. And the other one that I did want to highlight too is the Oregon Worker Relief Fund, which is a program that provides financial assistance to those folks that are ineligible for UI, unemployment insurance, and many of the federal reliefs that have come through the state. And many of these folks are essential workers too, and they have been left out, just falling through the cracks. And so the Oregon Worker Relief Fund has a very innovative system that provides financial relief and has already distributed millions of dollars out to those families in need. And we will be going into the session with a budget request. So it's not a bill, but it is a budget request. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marta, for lifting those. And you will find actually information on those on our one pager, which we will be sending out as well. Mariana, what else do we have on the chat? I know we have several questions on there.
Another question that I see, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Lisa. Do you anticipate any barriers to passing the gender responsiveness bill? Are there any plans for next steps after the bill is passed?
Thank you for that question. I think in terms of barriers, one thing is, I think among legislators, really being clear that there are differences between how men in prison and how women in prison are treated. Obviously, all genders and identities should not have to suffer, and they should all be treated as well as they can while they're in prison, but just being clear that women have higher rates of unemployment, poverty, domestic violence, and they have unique pathways into prison, why they end up in the justice system. There are differences, so kind of making it clear to legislators that a gender responsive coordinator and gender specific assessment is necessary at Coffee Creek. And in terms of next steps, we hope to be involved in who the gender coordinator is, how the listening sessions are is implemented across the state to make sure voices are actually being heard, and that the policy recommendations are actually created and created by people directly impacted by the prison system. And then making sure that in the legislature, once those policy recommendations are made, making sure that the legislature is actually passing them, which will happen in a future legislative session. So we will need continued advocacy for this bill.
Absolutely. And just as a reminder to folks, if you do have questions, there's a little icon at the bottom that's a Q&A. So that's where you submit your questions. And the next question is for Anderson. So regarding House Bill 4099, Racial and Justice Youth Collaborative. So how receptive is the Department of Education on this bill, and are they actively supporting it?
You said how receptive is which organization?
The Department of Education.
Oh, yeah, they're very much behind this. We've been working with them to put this forward. And if I need to go back to look at in terms of sponsorship, I believe they're not. The only reason why they wouldn't be able to sponsor is because it would be conflict of interest, but they absolutely are behind this, and this will be housed under their department. So it's a grassroots effort in the sense of they're a collection of CBOs, community organizations that are working in hand with Oregon Department of Education, as well as the governor's office. So it goes all the way up to the top.
Awesome. Mariana, do you have the next question? Thank you for that, Anderson. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Anderson. And I do, but one sec, I'm pulling it up. I see two questions from Troy. I'm gonna ask the second one first to pass it on to Isabella. How strong is the opposition to HB 4147? I worked in getting voting rights restored in Washington. It wasn't easy.
This is a great question, Troy. Thank you. I'll say that there's not organized opposition to this bill. But just knowing that, this isn't a really widely talked about issue in the public. And I think the more visibility and exposure it gets is really important. Just because we know that the more we talk about an issue and ground ourselves in why these laws were created, the better we can understand about why they shouldn't exist. And I think this is a perfect example where sometimes people's initial reaction to this is one of fear and one based in not humanizing people that are currently incarcerated. And I think the more that we can do that, the better chance we have to say that no, everyone does actually deserves the right to participate in our democracy, and voting is a civil right, and it's not something we can just designate to only certain groups of people. So yeah, there's not organized opposition, but there is certainly a lot of those, I think, questions that are coming up from people if they haven't engaged a lot on the issue before.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Isabella. And I did see on the chat that Anderson, I think he looked it up, and the Oregon Department of Education has actually formally endorsed House Bill 4099. So thank you for that clarification, Anderson. Appreciate it. Let's see, we have several more questions on here. I have for Sandy, how come Oregon is one of the last states for non-unanimous juries, and what's really been the barrier there?
Thanks so much, Jessica. And everyone, I had to switch to my phone, so apologies for any sound differences, quality differences. I think part of this has to do with what Isabella referred to before, the dehumanization of folks who are incarcerated. And so when it affects incarcerated folks, really not paying a lot of attention to it or putting resources to it. I think this also shows just the lasting impacts of white supremacy in this country, because what they did is they literally baked white supremacy into our laws. And when it was asked, why do we have non-unanimous juries? Oregon just said, that's just the way we do it, right? So it really took a concerted effort by legal scholars, advocates, and lawyers to research what had happened, pull all that information together, and then they had to start from base zero and take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And so finally, after all those efforts, the Supreme Court said, you can't do this anymore. And so this wasn't something done proactively by the state of Oregon. The US Supreme Court had to tell us, you can't do that anymore. But even then, we still have this fight where, although the Supreme Court has said we can't do this going forwards, they didn't create remedies for all of the folks who are harmed and impacted. And so that's what the fight is now. But again, I think this really just shows the power and lasting impacts of white supremacist systems in our country. And there are a lot of those racist systems that we have to identify and dismantle.
Thank you, Sandy. Really appreciate your answer. We have another question from Troy. I'm gonna pass it on to both Martha and Jessica. HB 4002 seems to be very important to Eastern Oregon. What is the ACLU doing to outreach there? And I would also add, what is the coalition doing for outreach in Eastern Oregon?
That's a great question. I'm happy to take a first stab on the ACLU. I know we're doing a lot of data analysis to looking at where our outreach is and being more intentional about these messaging and getting access to the community as well. But specifically on this bill, I'll actually leave that to Martha.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So on the coalition end, we have statewide organizations supporting this policy. And that certainly includes Eastern Oregon. So, we've made sure that they're engaged in this process. And I think on the policy level, so there's been a series of interim work groups that Rep. Salinas has put together, really bringing industry folks and proponents together to try to find some common ground. And those happened last year in November and December. Actually, one of them happened this January as well. And there's actually quite a bit of there were some growers from that region that sat at that work group and were also able to provide their perspective on the farm worker overtime bill. So I think they'll continue to be engaged, is my sense, and we'll see where we go next.
I love it. It's team effort, team effort. So we do have several questions. We will do the best that we can. If we can't, actually, we're going to wrap it up with one last question. And then we will be getting to you individually if we were not able to answer your question today. So thank you so much for submitting all those questions. Really, really appreciate the participation. The last question we have is from, let's see, what is it? Okay, so everyone shares, things move quickly. How do I stay up to date and track progress and support? So all of these bills you can track on the OLIS website online. And of course, you can always just follow ACLU, our website, our social media, and we will be doing updates on all of these bills, and we will be calling action items as well. So that will all be sent to you in a beautiful package tomorrow with all of those links, and you can start taking action today, but we will try to be keeping everybody updated as things go. Things are moving really fast, so you can always go online with those House bills as well. Perfect. And so we'll be getting to everybody individually. And Mariana, care to close us out?
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you to everyone. I would love to hear from all of you what you thought about this webinar. We are definitely wanting to make more events, but we want to learn from you all so we can get feedback to see what did you like, what you didn't like. So please take the time to fill out a quick 2-minute survey that has been put in the chat from the ACLU of Oregon Zoom page. Yeah, we would love to hear it, and all feedback is welcome. Before you all go, I would love to give a big shout out to our partners that joined us tonight. Next Up Action Fund, REAP Inc., Family Forward, and Pecun. Thank you all. Time is valuable, so I really appreciate you all being here with us, and for all your leadership and to passing these bills and really continuing to advocate for our communities across Oregon. So big thank you and big shout out to them. Also, thank you to our ASL interpreter and our captioner, Jamie. So Sarah and Jamie, thank you for being here. Thank you for making this event more accessible. And lastly, a huge, big thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. Everyone from tuning in from your screens, from your phone, from everywhere. We really appreciate you being here tonight, learning about, what our policy priorities are, what our values are, listening to our partners, but also wanting to engage and take action. So how can we engage and take action this short session? Great question. You can visit our website at the ACLU of Oregon. Under our work tab, you can visit the 2022 legislative session. There you will see all our policy priority bills. You will be able to learn more from them and see how you can take actions for each of them. Also, we have little tiny URLs that we have here in the slide deck for our ACLU 22 policy agenda. We also have one for the restoration of voting rights from worker overtime. So definitely check those links out and call your lawmakers, write them a testimony, get in contact with them and tell them to please pass these bills to support our agenda and to try to make Oregon a much better and happier place. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Good evening, everybody.